on the sense of height. Width-wise, they're wider than normal. It appears that several of the rooms would have had stone floors. Colorful furniture as opposed to the past. You wonder if that was just a local tradition. Of course, the people were shorter than I am. What the purpose of the indentation in the outline of the building is it a practical log construction indentation or something? It could be that this culture just, the resources of its area accommodated stone much more easily than elsewhere, where wood was the easiest resource. Only the abundance of stone walls suggests that's the case. It's a tenant farm. Notice these homes are from the islands near Samea, off on the west coast. So, obviously a very different environment. Nevertheless, it's still a mixture of wood and stone. This window once have a pretty frame, or was that designed to close it off, perhaps with a board? To suggest that in the late 1800s, these lands might have been owned by some individual. But then, as time progressed, the peasants that were here were able to get loans and buy some of these properties themselves. Working on the mainland, one time allowed to gain cash to make those payments. Now we'll hike up to Windmill Row. We have two basic designs. Here, this lower cone acts as a pedestal on which that windmill can be pivoted. And not only does that assemblage of wood stringing out to the left probably provide some structural as well as physics function in offsetting the weight and the power of a spinning windmill, but also it gave you leverage for grabbing onto it and then pivoting this whole windmill into the wind. See a sizable beam, damn near 2 feet across. We think not only the material, but the mechanics of pivoting this thing was a really dicey engineering issue. This part here was probably primarily designed just to hold these other three in the air. But this thing had to balance to a great degree that windmill and then factor in the added workload of its spinning. It just has a single shaft of wood that goes up. Exactly how the mechanism was designed to pivot, I don't know. You wonder if that lattice structure allowed for them to add more panels to create greater response to the wind. Somewhat bigger than the first one. You can see the same elements in the design. I would marvel at the windmills we use today. The knowledge that their technology and engineering perhaps were the impetus of many of the technologies we use today. These are all called post windmills, built 1748, 1876. This one we looked at with the cone, 1871. It's pretty the way they have built these walls. I wonder if that's the way they were built, stone on the bottom and then the typical kind of fence that you see in parts of these countries. It creates an environment that makes you feel like you're in a community, which is neat. The section of homes is blocked. Looks like just small shack and sheds. The stone walls of those buildings that are closed off to us are rich with moss And still another style of fence, which we've seen before. It's starting to lean, which suggests we're not going to get inside of it. So it uses a log crib for a base. I'm guessing these really were a traditional swing that a community might have. And lovely morning on the Baltic, at least here. The Swiss villa. 1870 wedding gift from his son. An older house used as a private residence now. Approaching the remains of the chapel. The smell of lilacs. Front door. Notice the attempt to add some style to the two pillars in the front. Fishermen facilities we'll go take a look at. The net sheds. And notice they have two different roof treatments. Not to mention this little birdhouse. A la the same design thing. In Riga and Lithuania, Latvia, all the houses seemed obvious. But here you can't distinguish easily between what was the house and what was the barn or combination. Thing is interesting, whatever it is. It looks like it's supposed to be on the end of a post. Small barrels. The central area and a side room, probably for storage. The dwelling area. With this massive stove, they probably were quite warm if they didn't get smoked out. Again, notice how low the doors are. Maybe it was to keep more heat in. That iron be the flue adjustment. Interesting if they use such a device. Was it a flower bed? But you'd think that would tend to rot those logs out. The most important logs in the house, the support logs. Another large post windmill built on that rock cone. This looks the same, of course, as what we've seen. But this is kind of interesting. Again, this overhang, obviously extremely intentional. But why? Perhaps it gave farmer an area to work with outside the barn so it didn't get dirtied up or cluttered up. And yet still have some protection from the elements. Pretty, I remember, Mama house. Interesting front entryway. Perhaps a pantry. One of the people who used to occupy this house. Notice how the old technology of the oven continues, and yet this may be a store-bought unit. These wallpapers were hand printed apparently in 2006, recreating the ones that were originally here. Certainly must have been a labor of love. And notice that. Probably a stove or a heating stove on the other side. Probably you filled that up with water. Pretty spacious house. You can imagine it being lived in. Been the wonderful place to spend summer evenings, probably. Those windows could be taken out and replaced with screens.